Hey, how's it going everyone? This is Wiley here. In today's video, I want to cover a subject one of my viewers asked me to cover, which is the top 5 features that I want in a camera body or a camera system. And I thought this was pretty interesting because there is a lot of new camera bodies coming out, and it's something that I've really never covered before on this channel. Now, before getting into the features, one thing that I do want to say is that this list is going to be very subjective because it really has to do with the subject matter that you want to capture with your camera, whether it's photography or videography. When you actually choose a niche that you want to photograph, you're going to tend to want to have a specific set of features that's going to make life easier on you. So knowing what subject matter you're interested in is definitely going to help you fine-tune the key features that you're going to want. Keep in mind that my top 5 might not be your top 5. What I want to really do is give you my top 5 to get you thinking so that you can make your own top 5. That way you don't buy into, the hype of new products, and you can better spend or save your money. So let's go ahead and get right into it. The first feature that I always look for is really great dynamic range. Now, this is the first feature, but honestly, most cameras nowadays have incredible dynamic range, so it really doesn't discount many camera bodies, but occasionally you do come across a sensor that does have a little bit lower dynamic range than what I'm used to, and I always discount those camera bodies. The reason why I say dynamic range is that I usually shoot RAW and JPEG. I usually like to use the JPEG as like my benchmark so that I can always reference how I edited my RAWs and compare it to my JPEG. In whatever editor that I'm using, recovering shadows is definitely one of the sliders that I move very often, which tells me I like cameras with a lot of dynamic range because I'm usually recovering shadows. I definitely have a lot of subject matter in which there's going to be a lot of bright areas and a lot of dark areas. So knowing how I take photography, this is definitely one of the key features that I'm always looking for. So anytime a camera system is actually pushing for more dynamic range and making it easier to use, it's definitely going to be a camera system that I'm really interested in. This is definitely something that you should think about, which is when you're using your RAW editor, what slider do you use the most, and can you actually relate it to a camera spec? Because if you can, then that's definitely a spec that's really going to be at the top of your list that you're always going to be looking for when you buy into a camera system or a camera body or lenses, what have you. So definitely something for you to think about. Number 2 on my list is definitely image stabilization. Now there's 2 types that we can talk about. Really, there's 3. There's optical image stabilization. There's in-body image stabilization, which is often referred to as IBIS. And if you're a videographer, you also have digital image stabilization, which is kind of relatively new and people are still trying to work out the kinks to it. So I wouldn't exactly call that as something that you can use consistently, but it's definitely going to get better, and it's definitely going to be really important in the future. So don't forget about that. The reason why this is number 2 on my list is because image stabilization definitely expands your margin of error. In other words, you can be a little bit looser with your shutter speeds if you have some sort of stabilization. A lot of times when I talk to new photographers that don't really know about the exposure triangle, they really struggle with motion blur or image blur because a lot of times they're really capturing in low light situations. And my definition of a low light situation is basically anything without the sun. The sun definitely puts out a ton of light, and it's really easy to shoot photography when the sun's involved. Unfortunately, for a lot of new photographers, they definitely like to shoot indoors. They like to shoot at night. They like to shoot at events, which a lot of times is going to be indoors. And what happens is they're really dealing with very slow shutter speeds. And if they're shooting with a system that doesn't have image stabilization, what tends to happen is they're going to get very blurry images and they won't understand what's going on. So one of the things that I always tell them is that you definitely want either the lens or the body to have really good stabilization because it's going to make your life a little bit easier. A lot of people love prime lenses, and there's definitely a lot of prime lenses out there that's not going to have optical image stabilization. So having IBIS or image stabilization in the camera body is really useful because that's kind of a catch-all. This is the reason why I think IBIS is one of the core technologies that pretty much all camera manufacturers are really working towards, because it just makes life so much easier. Now on the videography side, the reason why we like image stabilization is because we're going to be able to handhold our shots. This is the part where I would say that optical image stabilization right now is a bit more natural, and I actually prefer that over IBIS, because the reason for that is a lot of times IBIS can be a little bit jerky because we don't really know what it's doing. Sometimes it's trying to hold a position a little bit too much and it's really not flowing with the scene. So there's definitely some issues with IBIS depending on what kind of camera body or brand that you're going with. So you got to be careful of that. Optical image stabilization is definitely where it's at when you want a very natural scene. So I tend to actually care a little bit more about having image stabilization in the lens when it comes to video, but that could change depending on firmware and technology. It's definitely something that you want to look for. Again, digital image stabilization is definitely an upcoming technology for this, and it's something that we're going to have to watch for. We definitely need a little bit more configurability for digital image stabilization. Hopefully that comes soon, but I really don't know. But it's definitely something that's worthwhile to look at for the videography side. Just know that if you want to handhold your shots, you definitely want to have some sort of image stabilization in your camera bodies. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of micro jitters, and you're going to have to do a lot of post-processing in order to get all of those jitters out, which usually means it tends to take a lot of time for your computer to process all of that footage. Number 3 on my list, and this one's going to be a really short talk, which is battery life. It's one of the things that I always look for because I travel a lot. I don't really want to carry a whole lot of equipment with me because generally I'm usually carrying 2 to 3 sets of different types of equipment. So if I'm doing video, a lot of times I'm also carrying a lot of professional audio gear with me. So having a camera body that could at least last half a day is really useful to me. Now, don't get me wrong, I've had plenty of camera bodies that had really bad battery life, and we deal with it. It just makes life easier. Again, a lot of the features that I'm really looking forward to or I use is to make my life a little bit simpler. Now, number 4, number 5 can actually flip-flop, but because I'm more of a video shooter, number 4 is going to be audio performance. In other words, can I capture really good audio on my camera body? Because I do a lot of video, a lot of times when I'm actually doing my videos, I'm also capturing audio. I always look for camera bodies that's going to have a really good audio interface, specifically the preamps, but honestly, the preamps is kind of just the beginning for audio. There definitely could be market improvements in a lot of our camera body when it comes to audio because we're still missing a lot of professional audio features that these camera bodies just don't normally have. Hopefully in the next couple of generations, they really ramp up on, specs and features for audio, because for videographers, and a lot of you know this, but capturing really good crisp audio can definitely make or ruin a good video. Lastly, number 5 on my list, and I bet you a lot of people probably have this as number 1 on their list, but that's autofocus performance. A lot of people want to have that face detect, want to have really fast autofocus. I'm the type of person where I'm very comfortable using manual focus, and I don't really rely on the autofocus as much. When I take pictures, I definitely want good, single point autofocus. If I'm doing any type of aviation, in other words, being at an air show, I definitely want to have good continuous autofocus. But in those type of events, you take so many pictures that you're bound to actually going to get at least 30 to 50 pictures that are going to be really good regardless of the autofocus performance. Just like everybody else in the world, I definitely want fast and accurate autofocus. But at the same time, when you look at the videography side, what we really want is consistency and accuracy. And a lot of times these cameras really aren't doing that. Now, there are certain brands like Canon that have been doing it for quite a while, and they seem to have gotten this down to a really good science. But autofocus for photography and for video is definitely very useful. I definitely take full advantage of it when I'm actually doing photography, but on the videography side, I can either take it or leave it depending on the scene. So those are my top 5 features anytime I'm looking for a camera system that I'm going to be buying into. Now, a lot of people are going to have different features that I didn't cover. I bet you one of them could be megapixels, because a lot of people do care about megapixels if you're doing some sort of wildlife or aviation in which you're cropping in a whole lot. Then having extra megapixels, having that extra detail is definitely going to be important to you. I would definitely love to know what your top 5 features are, and just give me feedback on what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great weekend. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.